The following program will make you want to grow things and experience new and wonderful dreams about your plants, garden, and garden design. Listener participation is always strongly advised. Good evening and welcome to Down the Garden Path with your host Joanne Shaw and Matthew Dressing right here on Reality Radio 101. To get on board right now, send us an email. Our email address is instudio101@gmail.com. And now, right to your hosts of Down the Garden Path, Joanne Shaw and Matthew Dressing.
Thank you and welcome everyone to this episode of Down the Garden Path, where we discuss down-to-earth tips and advice for your plants, gardens, and landscapes. As landscape designers and gardeners, we think it is important and possible to have great gardens that are low maintenance, and we want to help you make it happen. I am Joanne Shaw, landscape designer and owner of Down to Earth Landscape Design. I've been designing beautiful landscapes for homeowners east of Toronto for over a decade. With me across Zoom once again is my co-host Matthew Dressing. Welcome, Matthew.
Welcome, Joanne. Good evening, everybody. My name is Matthew Dressing, horticulturist and landscape designer and owner of Natural Affinity Garden Design. Natural Affinity is a landscape design and garden maintenance firm servicing Toronto and the Eastern GTA. Joanne and I enjoy hosting Down the Garden Path each week, bringing you interesting, relevant, and helpful topics to help you achieve a great garden. We learn right along with you from each other, from our research, and from the guests that join us here on the show. As always, we welcome your questions via social media, email, or phone call.
That's right. And we want to thank everybody for joining us on the live recording of Down the Garden Path here on Reality Radio 101. And let you know that you can always check out past shows of Down the Garden Path on your favorite podcast app. We celebrated, we've been doing podcasts for over 4 years and radio show for over 7 as of last week. And so we just want to welcome everybody and let you know that there's more content out there. And while you're there, please subscribe on your app and you will be notified when new content is up. And always please like, share, or leave us a comment, which we would love. Wouldn't we, Matthew?
We would love it. Well, as we continue here down the garden path, we're more than halfway through November. And this month, we're talking with garden authors. We have some interesting and informative titles lined up to explore with you and their authors this month. Tonight, we head to our bookshelves to take a closer look at the new Gardener's Handbook, Everything You Need to Know to Grow a Beautiful Garden by author Daryl Beyers. So if you'd like to join the conversation, you have a question for Daryl, perhaps you'd like to share us an experience. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to know where you're writing from. And you can write us here at instudio101@gmail.com.
That's right. And so we're very excited to welcome Daryl. Daryl is the gardening program coordinator at the New York Botanical Garden. He was a staff writer, photographer, and editor for Fine Gardening, and a contributing gardening editor for Martha Stewart Living. Welcome to the show, Matthew. Or Daryl, sorry. Matthew's like, there you go. How's that for an intro?
Oh, thanks. I'm really happy to be here, and I'm really glad that you guys asked me to come on and talk about gardening today. It's one of my favorite things to do. So,
especially on the snowy Monday. Did you get the snow as well in New York?
I'm actually right at the moment. I'm actually in Northern California, so we don't have any snow here right now. Yeah, I just happen to be out this way right now. So yeah, we got snow and down that way a little bit of kind of rainy slushy mess. But yeah.
Very
It's
nice.
always fun to come on Monday nights on snowy days, right, Matt, and talk about gardens.
Yeah,
that's right.
Well, as gardeners, gardening I think is a 4-season sport. You know, it doesn't really even if we have, difficult winters, you don't have to live in, Southern California to garden all year round. I think you can still do lots of things in the garden. I have friends who continue to grow cold season greens and things like that in little hoop houses. It might be a little trickier up in Toronto, but even down in New York, we can do it. You can do stuff.
Hmm.
Yeah.
As well as enjoy them. Like I actually went for a walk this morning, with all the snow, new snow, and it was, I love it when it's sticky and stuck to all the branching. And I mean, it just really is beautiful to see. I think you look at a garden from a different point of view.
Yeah, you see, it's kind of what we call the winter bones when you think of garden design. If your garden, your garden is like you're getting there when it looks just as beautiful in the winter as it does in June, or July,
Mhm.
like because it shows that you put things together. I just uh, I just did a magazine article. I'll give them a little plug. Horticulture Magazine, which is a popular gardening magazine in the States, and I did an article on winter trees. And so it was all about selecting trees for the winter, but not just evergreens. People always
Mm,
think evergreens. Oh, a
yeah.
fir tree, a spruce, like that's, I
Yeah.
need winter interest is an evergreen. And we focused a lot on trees with beautiful bark and interesting form and like long lasting berries, like a hawthorn tree or something like that. And so winter, it's not over in winter. You get to take a little bit of a break, which is nice because like everything,
Yeah.
it's always busy otherwise. But you can still be, participating in it. I've had a lot of my students. A couple of them have sort of indicated that they're buying these little like light boxes, like it's like a little mini greenhouse that they can keep inside of their apartment. Because a lot of my students live in Manhattan, and so they have just an apartment or something, and they're just going to grow microgreens or start some herbs or something like that. So there's still stuff you can do, sure.
It's great. It's nice to see the enthusiasm in gardening these days.
Oh yeah, I mean, despite all the difficulties that we've been going through with everything that kind of has happened since the pandemic and everything started, there was a big interest in gardening, and we're teaching even more classes now at the Botanical Garden. More and more people are coming out of the woodwork or whatever you want to call it, and they wanted to, people want to learn they wanted to learn how to grow their own food. That was sort of a big
Hmm.
piece of the puzzle
Yeah.
early on, because grocery
Hmm.
stores were sort of weird to go to. And then but people got stuck at home, and they're looking out their back window and they're like,
Hmm.
I don't like this
Yep.
isn't pretty, and so then they wanted to fix that. So I think it was like it was vegetable gardens and swimming pools were like the big
Hmm.
the big
Yeah,
thing.
here in
Yeah,
Toronto too. Yeah, in the Eastern
yeah,
GTA, definitely.
yeah. So that was kind of
Those
what
were
happened. Yeah.
those were definitely the focus, weren't they?
They were. So, mentioning the New York Botanical Gardens, why don't you start by telling us a little bit more about your work there and your teaching?
Sure. Well, it's almost 10 years ago now that I started teaching gardening sort of for small little community continuing education programs like in high schools and things like that. And I didn't learn. I learned gardening by doing gardening. That's sort of one interesting way that I came to it. I studied my education is as in landscape design. I was in a landscape architecture program at the University of Minnesota. But what ended up happening is I got so much. I was so into the plant part of everything. So like in my design work, and so I wanted to learn more about plants, and I sort of stumbled into this career in gardening out of school. And I really sort of learned gardening, on the job. I was lucky, and people hired me to work on their estates and sort of learn gardening while I was like helping them, make their garden. And so after about, like, I don't know, you always think you know more than you do, but like after about 5 years of doing that, then I wanted to I thought it'd be fun to teach classes. And I had a friend of mine who was like, why don't you teach this class, at this local library and just see what happens. And so I started doing that, never having taught really. And I found out you learn just as much by sharing what you know
Hmm.
about gardening than
Yeah.
you do just like reading books. And like gardening is all about like you're always learning something new. Every time you talk to a gardener, you get some new tip or some new thing or something else like that. And so I started, on a very modest level. And then after about after several years of teaching for these smaller programs, I thought, well, maybe it's time to like move up to the big leagues, and I'll just pitch something to NYBG. And they were looking for somebody to teach their fundamentals of gardening course. It's basically their introductory course. And they needed somebody to do it in the winter because nobody wanted to teach it in the winter because everybody wanted to go on vacation in the winter. So the new guy, Daryl, basically got to teach it. And it was really exciting because there was a fellow named Ralph Snodsmith who was a sort of a famous radio guy in New York. He hosted a gardening radio program, and he more or less invented that course. He kind of came up with it years ago, like back in the 70s. And they gave me all of his notes, and they were like, "Okay, Daryl, like this is all Ralph's lecture notes, and like here's your chance to teach this class." And so I was able to kind of figure it all out, and over the course of 6 weeks, teach this fundamentals of gardening course. And that was my very first course that I ever taught at the Botanical Garden. And since then, I've taught it, at least 100 times. And it's basically the course that the book is based on. The New Gardener's Handbook is more or less the companion text for that course. It's our working title was the Fundamentals of Gardening book, right? But that's, a publisher will never let that be a title. Like it has to be, has to have
Did you
more...
end up modifying so you got the notes, but you must have made it your own, or sometimes things changed, right?
I had to update things, like he was talking about, pruning, like sealer and like Saigon, like all these like really crazy unsafe, practices that they didn't know better about. He wasn't really talking about, he wasn't talking about organic gardening. It was more like ornamental gardening. So lots of sprays and lots of synthetic fertilizers and stuff like that. And so we just sort of broke down the basics of it. So that was one of the first courses I taught. And then I started teaching container gardening courses and some landscape design courses. And then somewhere about 5 years in, I was one of those people that basically, I was like, I would just say yes to everything. That's something I always try to teach my students. It's like, an opportunity doesn't just come to you. You just have to keep saying yes to all these things. And someday you'll get to this point where you'll get rewarded for all your hard work. And so I just said yes to everything. It's kind of like gardening. Just say yes to everything. Try that plant, do this thing, or do that, right?
I'll try it.
Like I'm going to grow that. I'm going to start this from seed, and I don't know if it's going to work. And,
do you want some of this? Yes.
Yeah, you want some tiger lilies? Sure I do.
No, we draw the line. There are some lines.
People are always giving away some of the daylilies and stuff like that.
Oh gosh.
So I taught classes there for years, and then after a while, they asked me to be the coordinator, basically, of the gardening certificate program. NYBG it's basically, there's a plant school there where you can study landscape design, you can study floral design, you can study horticultural therapy, botanical illustration, botany, there's horticulture programs, there's lots of things that they do. And then there's a gardening program, and the gardening program is a little bit more for like the homeowner, the casual, they're not studying it to like go and get a job or something like that necessarily. They just want to learn it for their own backyard. And so I became the coordinator of that program. Basically, they needed somebody who sort of was in the industry and sort of knew what people were thinking. And I helped them find instructors, and I helped guide the curriculum. So it's like, we want, somebody pitched a class called, Shady Characters, shade gardening, in New England. And so like, do you think that's a good one, Daryl? And I was like, yeah, sure it is, because there's trees everywhere, so it's that kind of thing. So I help guide the curriculum, and I sort of sit down, because the people that are running the program aren't necessarily gardeners, they're administrative educators. And they need a gardener to talk to help them kind of guide it. So that's basically what I do there, besides teaching lots of the classes. We were planning our spring summer catalog just this morning. I was in a Zoom meeting with them for about 2 hours. And basically what we found out is we do these weekend classes that are basically we've really upped the ante on all of our vegetable gardening stuff. So that's become like, that's what people really want to know about. And an interesting thing is things have gone on, primarily online, and we have some blended classes where, we can take people into the garden, but it's really difficult to do anything inside of a classroom right now.
Mm-hmm.
It's just not safe. But we can have classes outside, and then we can do Zoom. And so it became this new world of Zoom. And so what's happened is we have people that are signing up for these classes from all over the country. I had people signing up. There was a woman who took my gardening class, and she was in Italy. She
Oh,
found out about it. I
wow.
think she knew somebody in New York, and they told her about it, and so she signed
Yeah.
up for it. And so we're reaching all these other people. So I fully expect lots of Toronto folks to
Yes.
start signing up for the, classes. But it's really kind of exciting because we can reach more people. It can be hard, like, it's hard to get to the Bronx in New York and get to the garden and
Yeah.
take a class. So it's been really fun. Yeah, we put a lot of
Definitely.
work.
I know before the show I was mentioning that I have visited a number of times, but I was only able, I kind of tag along with my husband when he's doing business trips, but always in December or January. And I've never been able, so as much as it is beautiful to walk around gardens in the winter, and I also not, my timing has been off as far as the courses go. So now I might, so I said to him next time, I said, now I really have to plan it better. If I can't see the gardens in the summer, then I need to definitely try to be there for a course. So, but now I might be able to be home and do a course.
That's
So,
the cool thing. And it's made it more challenging for me as an instructor because I'm talking about like, oh, and then you do this in the winter. And they're like, well, I live in zone 10 in, so in San Diego. So, and can I even grow that plant? And can I do it? And I'm like, oh, yeah. And then I got to like think it through and sort of figure it out. So, which is, it's sort of an extra challenge for me. I enjoy it, because basically what I do is, and this is kind of circling back to the book and the fundamentals class, is what I really try to teach people is how to kind of how to learn this, how to decipher this stuff on their own. In other words, it's great to read a book. It's great to read a gardening article or a gardening book and get some get some general, sort of tips and tricks and things like that. And sort of like the how-tos, how to lift and divide your dahlias, how to, divide a hosta, how to propagate seeds and things like that. Or what I'm always trying to get across to people, which is what I do I've been doing it in the class for years, and now I do it in the book, is I like to talk about the why do's of the how-tos is how we phrase it. In other words, I don't want to just tell you what to do. I want you to understand why we do it,
Yeah.
So when you prune something, when you cut a branch off of a shrub, like, why do you cut it here and what's going to happen? You're redirecting the energy in that plant. You're cutting it. If you cut it above a growth node versus below a growth node, what's going to happen there? And so I have to teach them about meristematic tissue, which is basically growth tissue, and sort of, and I think you become much more empowered as a gardener if you know why you're doing what people are telling you to do. And then you start to, for me, it's all about teaching gardeners how to figure out their situation, because that's what I had to do when I was learning it on the fly. I was put in charge of a 10-acre, estate garden, and I didn't know how to garden, right? But they were still building it. And so I was, and they let me take classes at NYBG, and I read a lot, and I sort of had like, I did have a knack for it. Some people, like I could understand the science behind things. So when I learned something, but I was really just trying, like testing things out. But it really helps to sort of understand why we do what we do, and not just have somebody say, it's time to feed that, what do you feed it with? This stuff, well, okay, why do I want a fertilizer with more nitrogen or less nitrogen, or, and it's because nitrogen makes leaves. So I don't want to feed my tomato with lots of nitrogen and get a bunch of tomato leaves. I want tomatoes. So I need something that's going to make tomatoes. So I got to, use a higher phosphorus or a higher potassium fertilizer, that kind of stuff. So it's all about teaching people, the why do's of the how to's. That's kind of how we ended up phrasing it.
And does the book, so we should mention the title of the book, The New Gardener's Handbook, Grow a Beautiful and Bountiful Garden. Does it cover both ornamental and vegetable gardening?
It does. That was why we did the Beautiful and
And
Bountiful.
bountiful.
Yeah. Figuring out the title of the book is always an adventure, and then coming up with the subtitle is the next step in the process. And so that was one I told them it was very important that we mention it can be beautiful and it can be bountiful. In other words, these are the fundamental things about how all plants grow, and it applies to an oak tree and it applies to a lettuce, right? And so we're sort of covering all that stuff because we basically first we talk about plant parts. That's, chapter 1, basically. Sort of the roots and the shoots. I'm always talking about balancing the roots and the shoots, and I want people to understand how when you're a gardener, you're not just put in charge of the pretty parts of the plant or the parts that we like to eat. You're also in charge of the scary underground part that nobody ever gets to see. You own those roots just as much as you own the shoots. And the thing is, they feed each other. They are balancing each other out. So if you are growing a plant that has good, strong, healthy, vigorous roots, it's going to have all the leaves and the flowers and the fruits and everything above it, because the roots are always absorbing the moisture and the nutrients and things like that from the soil and then taking it to the shoots, and the shoots are performing photosynthesis, which are creating basically carbohydrate foods to fuel all the plant growth. So you can't have one or the other. You're sort of in charge of both pieces of the plant. And lots of times a plant is struggling. People wonder why their plant is struggling, and it turns out that it's because there's an issue with the roots, and people don't think of that necessarily right off the bat. They look at the top of the plant and they're like, what's eating my plant? Or why is it, this, and why is it that?
What do I need to spray it with, right?
Yeah, but it could just be like your roots aren't happy. And so then we get into, you may start to figure out that I talk about this a lot, so I kind of know where the next step is. And so the next step is, okay, so the roots aren't happy. What do I got to do to make the roots happy? The ground, the soil. It's all about the soil. That's chapter 2, and that's lesson 2 when I teach it as a course, right? And so you got to figure out, okay, so my roots live in the soil, so I have to give them a happy place to live underground. What does that mean, right? What is, you can't just like the way sort of, you can't just go like hunking your plants into the ground and expect them to work without really preparing, giving them the right environment. You can't just, you have to make sure the soil is good, and it's the right soil for that plant, and it has the nutrients that it needs, and it holds the water that it needs, basically. And we talk about improving the soil, which then circles and basically turns into a composting lesson. And people started to understand composting and realize how important compost is. Basically, compost becomes the answer to every soil problem. That's usually, it's like, here's a story problem, how do I fix my soil? Compost. Okay, and then why? Right? Like, how does it help? It improves the water holding ability of the soil. It improves the fertility of the soil. It fixes the structure, it does lots of great things to the soil. So it all kind of just sort of proceeds along from there. We just sort of keep going as we go.
And are you preaching, I mean, this time of year, we talk a lot on the show about leaving the leaves or using the leaves as mulch. And that's one of the things that has evolved over time, right? Back in the day, they were like, we were vacuuming up the garden and putting it to bed and making it nice and clean. And Matt always points out that nobody rakes the leaves in the forest, and those trees do fine, right? Those trees and plants are happy, So
that's exactly how I teach it. Like I say that exact same thing. Nobody rakes the forest. Nobody goes into the forest with a backpack blower, right? Blast it all out. And look, they grow just fine. It's funny because the first garden that I worked at, it was the exact opposite, and I didn't even know any better. And they literally picked up every single leaf out of that garden. It was crazy. And then I learned, after the fact, basically, that they were doing it wrong, and we were wondering why we were struggling to keep these plants happy and everything.
Because we take it all away, and then in the spring we have to put something back on, right? And it's kind of like, well, if we just had left it there.
Right.
So it's amazing.
And and I've read there's some science that backs up actually the fact that the leaves that fall off of the tree, the kind of organic matter that adds to the soil is the best for the roots of that plant. So in other words, you don't want to put cedar mulch around a, an ornamental grass, technically. Like it's actually the wrong stuff, right?
Mm.
And so the oak leaves that fall and are around the oak tree break down into the exactly correct physical, sort of chemical properties that the oak roots need. And they've
Right.
done, they've done soil studies about that, and they actually know that that's the truth. It's difficult when you're kind of in your backyard and you want to mulch a new bed and it's a perennial bed, and where you're going to get a bunch of old, like, ornamental grass scraps or something like that. And
Yeah.
you use whatever you can. What
Mhm.
what I've done in the past, and I've got some clients to kind of go along with me on this, is we try to use like straw or something like that as our
Mm.
mulch for
Okay.
herbaceous beds, if
Mhm.
they're okay with the look.
Yeah.
But usually mulch
Yeah.
is basically all about getting the plant established. And then
Yeah.
once the plant is sort of big and growing, you can kind of like ease up on the mulching. It's all about kind of plant establishment. It's sort of the big piece of the puzzle there. I don't like to, perpetually mulch a garden. I think you're doing something wrong if you need to every year put down 2 inches of bark mulch. That's like,
Mhm.
there's something going on there.
Yeah.
Better to
And
leave
then you end
better
up
to
with a
leave the
garden
weeds.
that's going to be too high eventually
Yeah.
too, right?
I've been in gardens that way where we
Yeah.
show up and it's like there's 16 inches of bark mulch around the and then they wonder, why don't they grow, right? Why don't they grow? Well, the water, nothing's getting down there. There's no
Yeah.
water down there. There's nothing happening, so it just doesn't work.
Yeah, definitely. So is that you obviously, since between your classes and the books, you love the new gardener, like just educating them and starting them off.
Mhm.
Are there some experienced gardeners? Like, is this the book that anybody can get something out of?
It's turned out to be the case, yes. And so it became the New Gardener's Handbook because it's sort of it's perfect for a new gardener, like somebody who doesn't know anything.
Right.
But being I think everything. I think all. Um, I mean, my background before I studied landscape, I was a comparative literature major. I was like, which is part of the reason why I think I can write. And so
Yeah.
I understand like what makes a book, useful. And
Yeah.
books and these things need to work on several levels, right? And so the way that I wrote it was very much. I needed to have other bits and pieces in there for people who had been gardening for a while, and I kind of took experiences out of the classroom and sort of put them in there because I would have students who had been gardening for maybe 10, 15, 20 years.
Mm.
But then in the propagation lecture or something like that, they'd be like, oh, I never thought of that, or I never did that. Like I never, I never like knew about stratification, seeds
Mhm.
going through a winter period or something like that. Or cuttings was sort of like an epiphany for one student. She's like, I mean, I could just like cut a hunk off and get it to make roots, and like I don't have to go to the garden center and buy everything. And I'm like, no, you don't. Like you can make lots and lots of plants just from
Yes.
plants you have. And so that's been the most rewarding part of since the book came out in February, that I've been hearing from experienced gardeners, and they've told me they've gotten like something out of it that was,
Oh, wonderful.
that wasn't just a new gardener thing. And so I was really happy to find that out. Like there was things that they just didn't know, that they,
Yeah.
I've been doing this for 25 years ultimately. So it's kind of added up over time. So, yeah.
Wow, and it looks like Matt's got his fingers up, so it looks like we've got lots of questions for you too.
Oh, I didn't
So
know
I
that
mean,
meant,
I'd
yeah.
say the timing of your book was great for everybody being home looking in their garden. But
Yes.
Matt, take it away. What is everybody saying?
Yeah, so we've got lots of questions and great comments. We'll start with Katie. Katie's written in, hello, Joanne and Matthew. Very cool guest tonight. I've read a lot of Daryl's articles and his books. Excellent. So glad he is on the show. I have a question. What is this watering the garden and not the plants? Question mark. What is
Ah.
that concept all about? Thank you.
Ooh.
Yeah, because the way that I talk about watering, let's see, watering comes right after planting and mulching, because then that's the next step that you have to think about. When basically the main reason that we lose new plants is we don't water them properly.
Mhm.
But I like to change the way that people think about how they do their gardening. And one of the things is I want you to think more about watering, like she said, watering the garden instead of watering the plant. In other words, you're not just trying to give the plant a drink, you're trying to give the entire ground that the garden's growing in a drink. In other words, fully charging it with moisture. because the soil will hold on to a certain amount of moisture, and then the rest of it goes, gravity pulls it down, it goes into the water table and it disappears. So you need to fully charge the ground layer. And so if you just think about watering the plant, all you're really doing is kind of keeping the plant, happy. But what you want the plant to do is you want it to expand its root zone. And it won't expand its root zone if you don't water the entire sort of garden space, in other words. And that whole entire garden space is also, it's a greater reservoir of water, which then can feed the plant, so that you don't need to water as frequently. So you want to, what we like to talk about is watering long and deep, not short and sweet. You need to really give it a nice soak. So you want to, I'd rather water twice a week for an extended period of time and really charge it, instead of every day giving your plant, a 10-minute drink or something like that. Because then what happens is the plant just stays happy in its little spot. And if you fully water the garden, then the roots are going to start to expand, because a root will not grow if that soil doesn't have any moisture. If it doesn't have any nutrients and if it doesn't have any moisture, the root will go a different direction. It'll just try to find it. And if you're just watering near the plant, it's just going to go round and round in a circle. It's just not going to go anywhere.
Yeah.
And remember, if you go back to the roots and the shoots thing, if you're watering your whole garden so the roots are expanding as far as they can throughout the garden, well, now your roots are bigger. And if your roots are bigger, your shoots are bigger. And so your plant is bigger and you have more flowers and you get more fruit and you get everything that you want. And so that's why I talk about watering the garden more so than just watering the plant. At the beginning, for the first few weeks, we kind of water the plant to make sure that it stays alive and does its thing. But then we transition into watering the garden, so the roots will expand into the entire garden. And then you get to the point where your plant has a big enough root system, so you don't need to water as much, because a lot of it has to do with, like, I like to think of lots of what I call lazy guy gardener techniques. And so like the less I got to do every day, the better. And so if my plants have nice, big, sturdy roots and they're expanded throughout the soil, and I have soil that holds moisture well because I've added organic matter to it to improve all that, then I don't have to water every day. And and maybe it rains enough where I don't have to water, at all during parts of the season. That's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about watering the whole garden.
Yeah, a lot of great advice there. Thank you.
Sure.
Indeed. So yes, thank you, Katie, for your question. Hopefully, Daryl gave you a great answer there. Nothing hopeful about it. It was a great answer. Patty's written in next. Hello, a question for Daryl. Is the Fine Gardening magazine still being published? And if so, where can I get it? Thank you.
It is still published. Yeah. I lived just down the street from there, because when I started working there, we moved really close to the offices. It's located in Newtown, Connecticut. And it still comes out. Yep, it's there, and you can find it. Depends on your region, but if you're kind of out east this way, you probably would find it even in a grocery store, but definitely in a bookstore. And you can go to finegardening.com, and you can get articles from them. They have like a subscription service. Like if you subscribe to the magazine, I think you get the website automatically, all the articles in there. But you can like read a couple of articles before they make you start to pay. If you dig really deep into that website, and if you were to type, go into their video section, you might find a video of me dividing an ornamental grass with a hacksaw. So there's stuff like that in there. But yeah, they're still out and about, and they keep cycling through cool stories. Good design articles, good plant articles, good gardening skills articles. I think it's an excellent magazine to start for beginning gardeners into like kind of intermediate gardeners, and then you can get a lot of good information out of it, for quite a while. And then some people just have subscribed for years and years and years.
Yeah.
So now I have to ask, what are your favorite publications for the more advanced gardener?
One, it's not a print. It's not a physical magazine anymore, but Garden Design is now online, and I think they're really great. And It's not just because Jim Peterson, who runs it, really liked the New Gardener's Handbook, but
Oh, that's good.
I've been keying in on that one for a long time, because
Yeah.
I like the design articles, and now they
Mhm.
seem to be getting a lot more sort of gardening skills articles in there, and I think it sounds like I'm going to be working with them a little bit to produce some little short garden lesson videos for them
Oh,
online,
excellent.
so people can kind of maybe keep your eye open for that. Basically,
Okay.
little 3-minute things. Like one of them is called "Your Soil is Alive," and then just sort of suck people in with that. It's like, what do you mean? And then go in there like, it is, right? And then, so I think they're really good, especially with design. That's excellent. I really like horticulture, where Horticulture Magazine has gone. The English Gardener is great. Even American Gardener, I think, is really good. So there's a lot of really good magazines out there. Fine Gardening is one of the top ones too, for sure.
Yeah, I think Garden Design Magazine, I know Jim as well, and I think they did a great pivot from online, from, an actual book to online. I saved I have all my old garden, I
I
didn't
know they're
part with
great,
any
right?
of those magazines. I love them, and lots of inspiration as a designer and gardener.
That's
And
kind of where they excel, is the
yeah,
design side of
definitely.
things. Yeah, and then horticulture they've been around for so long that they're really very much of a gardening skills and plant magazine. So you kind of have to pick. It's kind of like, it's the same way that I pick nurseries and garden centers for like what I need. So I go
Yeah.
to one garden center for a tree, and I go to another one for the herbs, and I go to another one. Like, you get different tastes from different
Yes,
places.
yes.
Yeah.
When
Definitely.
we're lucky enough to live in the urban areas where we have choices, that's
Yeah, if
certainly.
you can go to a couple.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely, definitely.
Because I live near a place called Gilberti's, who specializes in herbs, and they provide herbs for, I don't know if they make it up into Canada, but they provide the herbs for all the other garden centers. But
Oh,
I can
okay.
go to like the source, which is awesome.
Mm.
I think it's important that people understand the difference between a garden center and a nursery, though. You ever
Oh,
think of
sure.
that whole thing?
Mhm.
Nurseries make plants. Garden centers basically buy plants and then sell plants. And so there's a distinction there that isn't necessarily always made here in North America. If you were in the UK, they would never call something that functions as a garden center a nursery.
Mhm.
But in the States, and probably in Canada too, they'll call themselves a nursery, but they don't actually propagate anything. And
Mhm.
so what's important, what I think is cool, is there's really excellent garden centers that you can go to and get the plants that you need, but understand that most of those plants are coming from growers and getting delivered, and then they're selling them. But the cool thing to do is to kind of get a little bit out in the countryside, and find a nursery, find a place where garden nerds are propagating plants and making plants, and like
Yeah.
key in with them, and you'll find a place that like specializes in witch hazel,
Mhm.
or a rhododendron place or something like that. And then you can have, it's this whole world that a lot of kind of more casual home gardeners don't necessarily tap into. They go to the big box stores, or they go to their local sort of big, more sort of corporate garden center, which can be great.
Mhm.
But like, get out, if you find these smaller places, you might find some really unique things and meet some really interesting people. I always tell people when they visit the nursery to find the person that's got like the gnarliest hands, because that's the gardener, right?
Yes,
Not
yeah,
the kid with
definitely.
the hose. He
Yeah,
doesn't know
yeah, who
anything.
doesn't know anything?
I
Like
was
maybe
that
an
kid
annual
once,
person,
and he doesn't know anything.
right? Yeah.
He'll point you to the person who's like dirty and
Yeah.
sunburnt, and that's the person you want to talk to,
Yeah.
because they're going to give you all the great advice. Yeah.
Yeah,
Same thing.
exactly.
It's kind of the same with magazines. Like, so I read certain magazines for certain things, and I
Mhm.
read others for others. So.
Yeah. All right,
So
Matt.
continuing through our questions, and I think we somewhat talked to Petra's point or question, but we'll tackle it nonetheless. Petra, she writes in, okay, because of all this COVID stuff, I'm really scared about the food supply. I have never really been a gardener, so help. What are some of the basic principles of starting a garden that I should know or care about? Can you give me any really good resources? Petra says she is living in Washington, D.C. And
Oh,
thank you very much.
Well, the
she's,
book is a perfect start, right?
yeah. The New Gardener's Handbook is an excellent place to start, because
So,
really, what it's going to do, it'll teach you like you'll understand the plants better, you'll understand the soil, and it'll sort of move you into the next phases of things. And we do talk about things specifically, sort of talking, what you need to do to how you would feed a edible garden in a different way from an ornamental garden and stuff like that. So the basics are there. But ultimately, what some of the first steps for, if you're going to do, I like to call it edible gardening as opposed to vegetable gardening, because it means you can plant a blueberry bush, and you could plant a dwarf apple tree or two, so they cross pollinate, stuff like that. But in DC, boy, you could do a lot of cool stuff. But the first thing to do is find the sun. That's your first step for your vegetable garden. Edible plants need lots of sunlight, so it's very difficult to grow them if you're not getting full, sun. And full sun is 6 hours or more of direct sunlight a day. And 6 hours is pretty low. That's like a pretty minimal amount. So you're hoping that you're getting more than that, in the summertime. It's always, it's always shorter in the, like right around now, this time of the year, because of the days are shorter. So you need sun. And so you have to find your sunniest spot. And that's the first step. And then hopefully it's somewhat level. And then you have to kind of prepare that ground. And so you find the sunniest area. And if you don't have a sunny area, it doesn't mean that you can't do anything. It means that you're going to grow different stuff. So the advice is, if you're stuck with, you only get like 5 or 6 hours of direct sunlight, and you can't, so it's going to be really difficult to grow like an eggplant, or you're not going to do corn. You're not going to do a big tomato bush or something like that. But what you can do is you can work with plants that don't make big fruits. So we do leafy greens. They don't require as much sun energy, because remember, the sun is what's driving all the growth. And so if you don't have as much sun, it's easier for a plant to make a leaf than it is to make a big fruit. And so you can grow lettuce and kale, and you can grow, smaller sort of crops and things like that. But if you have the full sun, then you can kind of do a lot more. And after you figure out the sunlight exposure, then you have to figure out your ground. And so it depends a little bit on where you're gardening. I like to start with raised beds, but a raised bed doesn't have to be a structure. It can just be a pile of dirt that's like, 12 inches tall, just a bump of dirt. That is still considered a raised bed. Or you could build a structure. I like raised beds that are like 3 feet tall, because then I don't have to bend over and all that other kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
But you don't always get to do all that. So you can just make a pile of dirt, but you have to prepare that ground and get it ready. If you think your ground, if you're in an urban setting and you're a little bit worried about the ground, what might be in the ground, you definitely have to do a soil test. I always do a soil test for edible gardens, because the thing to remember is the plants are they're absorbing whatever's in the soil, and whatever they absorb, they put into their cells, and they store it in their cells. And so if they absorb something from the soil and put it into the lettuce leaf, and you eat that leaf, you're eating whatever that contaminant could be. So you always want to do a test and find out if your soil is safe. And then you're also going to find out if it's things you might need to do to improve it. If it's been a lawn for 20 years, there's a lot of problems with that soil. It's probably mostly dead because of the synthetic fertilizers and things like that went on it. So you have to think about what your dirt is. That's like the next step. And sometimes we make a raised bed and we just bring in dirt. We just pile it on top, and then we can grow right into that. And that's going to sort of give you this sort of initial good dirt. So think about the sun, and then think about the ground. And those are the first steps. And then think about what you want to eat, and pick anything that you like.
Have fun from there.
And have fun from there. And then also start small, I think. Like you don't need a 40 by 40 foot vegetable garden.
Good point.
5 feet by 5 feet, 10 by 10. That's going to give you a lot. A single tomato plant is going to give you quite a few tomatoes. So it depends on how much you like tomatoes. So think about the sky, the sun, think about the soil, the ground, and then just start having fun. And you can start from seeds, and you can start from plants, and just see what happens. Like you might, don't be discouraged. I talk a lot in my classes and also in the book about getting past gardening failures. It's sort of a theme in gardening, is the failure. I tried this thing and it didn't work. Well, that's part of that's par for the course. I sort of one of my little slogans is, you don't know a plant until you killed it 3 times. You ever heard that one? Right?
That's
It's
a good
super
one.
discouraging. Like, and
Yeah.
so we want to cut that in half. Maybe you kill it
Mhm.
once and you never kill it again. But in
Yeah.
other words, you don't really know a plant until you've grown a plant. And so just try it, and then try, and, sprinkle some basil seeds on the ground. They're going to grow. Like, pick the
Mhm.
easy stuff first, and then work your way up towards other things like that.
Excellent.
And
Great points.
go
Yeah.
from there.
Very good. Oh, now
Oh,
Matt, your sound's off.
Oh,
yeah.
I'm sounding off. I was sipping some tea. We have some more questions for Daryl. We've got Liam writing in. Thanks for a great talk today. Style question. What's your opinion on planting in larger drifts compared to smaller planting groups in a medium-sized garden? In your opinion, should we ever see the soil / mulch in a garden, or should it be covered? And what are your favorite shade plant combinations? Liam
Wow, that's
says
a
his visions in red still be with ladies mantum. And Liam is writing from Oakville.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
He's in our
cool.
neck of the woods,
All
Daryl.
right. I think that's a nice combo. I love the Visions Astilbes. I use them a lot. Astilbes are becoming sort of a fave of mine a little bit, so I like to combine those. One thing that I'll say, sort of a quick design tip, especially for shade gardening, is rely a lot more on the leaf than the flower sometimes. And when you're doing plant combinations, and this counts for sun or shade, try to work with different size foliage. In other words, if you have a plant with a small leaf, try to mix in a plant with a bigger leaf somewhere near it, and then find something in between. So like you can combine ferns with, say, a ligularia. So the fern has a fine texture. A ligularia, which is leopard plant, right, has a bigger leaf. And then something a little bit in between would be like a hellebore or an epimedium or something like that. And between the 3 of them, you're getting, like, one is a rounded, 2 of them are rounded leaves, and one is sort of like a pointy, pointy leaf, and one is smaller and one is bigger and one is in the middle. And then you're sort of combining, and then find things that, like, maybe have like a burgundy color or a blue, and you can kind of have a little fun with that. So that's a combination that I've done. I've done ferns, ligularia, and hellebore combo. Maybe with a shrub like a cephalotaxis or a leucotha or something like that to kind of blend into it. That's a pretty cool looking combo in a shady garden, and it'll give you flowers, during parts of the season, but mostly it's about the leaves. And then that was the shade plant question. What was one of his first ones?
I think to see the mulch or the soil.
Yeah. You should. Mulching is for new plantings, and so your garden is supposed to knit together, and that's the way that I like to do it. Oh, and then he talked about the masses. And so at the beginning, if with proper spacing, you're supposed, planting with proper spacing, you're going to see the ground in between, which is part of the reason why we mulch, because it's, conserving soil moisture, and it's keeping the seed weeds down a little bit, and all this other good stuff. But in time, those plants should all sort of grow together. That's kind of how nature works. And if they're growing together and you're not seeing the mulch, that means you probably don't have to mulch. And it's also going to be shading out weeds, and it's sort of, the garden is sort of coming into its own. That can happen in 3 years' time with a perennial garden, where they can fill in. With shrubs, might take a little bit longer for them to kind of get to the full size. If you started with a 3-gallon pot, and it's going to be a while before that, viburnum is, 6 feet across or something like that. So it takes a little bit longer. But I am much more of the mind that I don't want to see the spaces in between. I want things to kind of blend together. Now you can go in there as a gardener and kind of clean things up and prune and keep things from growing over on top of other stuff. And that's sort of that's like the next step of gardening. That's sort of like a little bit of a higher level, where you're sort of like really starting to train things that you have. But I think you shouldn't, you really don't want to see the mulch. And ultimately, your very best mulch, you've reached what I call the pinnacle of your garden, if you're mulching with compost. In other words, no more bark. Bark is done. You're putting down an inch of compost around all your garden plants, and that's improving the soil and doing all those good things that compost does. And then the plants fill in, and then you don't see anything anymore. Or the leaves that fall, rotted over the winter or something like that. when it comes to the massing versus the sort of smaller groups, in my design classes, I teach two different ways of grouping plants. There's the massing version, where basically, and that's the first way I learned how to how to design with plants was planting in large groups for a bigger visual effect. And the trick, and what happens then is you plant 7 of these things together, and it's kind of like you're just planting one big one. It sort of turns into one big one.
Yeah.
And a lot of people get hung up on like the 3s and the 5s and the 7s and stuff like that. For me, I'm thinking more about like, how big is the space, and how big will these plants grow? If I need 8, I'm going to use 8. I don't care that it's an even number, right?
Yeah.
And so I do it that way. And that's one. And so you do sweeps of things. So you have, and I like them to sort of weave together and blend together and have it be like interesting that way. Like you can see lots of really nice examples of that. Just look at an Ohm van Sweden design, and you'll sort of understand what massing is all about.
Yeah.
It's sort of it's a nice landscape design technique. Another way that I like to teach it, which is a little bit more, the other way of doing it, which is a little bit more akin to like how nature might do it, is I do something, I call it matrix designing, but I don't think it's really the right term, because there's another kind of matrix garden style that I'm not talking about. But basically, I can take the same amount of plants, but I just randomly scatter them all throughout the bed. So I might have 5 different kinds of plants, and I might have 7 of each or 5 of each, but I don't put them all in groups together. I just scatter them about. And so I'll have one here and one over there and one over here. And it becomes this like more sort of
organic almost.
Yeah, an organic tapestry. And so that's a little bit more how nature will work sometimes. In the larger scale of the landscape, it looks like masses. But if you walk out into a meadow and you look straight down at the ground in a 3-foot by 3-foot square area, you could count a dozen plants in that space. That's kind of how plants work. So it's an idea of diversity. And so I do that kind of thing. I sort of call it it's like a stylized naturalistic planting. So I'm picking where it goes. So I'll put that one plant, I'll put that grass behind that other one. So when I'm on the path, it creates a view that I want. Okay. So I'm thinking about it. I'm not just like throwing them out there. And like I
it is a bit more, because I was thinking, man, am I a control freak? Because that like freaked me out. Because
no,
I'm like, oh my God, I couldn't do that. But I guess you are thinking about.
I knew a gardener that did it that way, and it like looked crazy. I didn't like she would just throw the gallon pots out there and say, go plant them. I was like, I don't know, like that ain't right. And no. So it's almost harder to do the style that I'm talking about. Because you have to stand everywhere and look at how all these things are going to combine. So
definitely. So it is more intentional though.
Both ways work, but what you want to avoid is 3 of this, 3 of that, 3 of that, 3 of that, in very sort of static patterns, or no rows, right? Stay away from rows unless
those
you're doing
soldiers, right? Those cedars, those soldiers. Oh my gosh, I try to say to people like, do you want a garden or do you want a row of soldiers?
Right. And the other tip is even if you get too plant crazy, scale back your palette. Pick 5 plants and just work with those, right? You don't need 100 things, because gardeners fall in love with plants, and we want to grow every single plant in the world. And so we have one of this, one of this, one of this, one of this, one of that. That can be tricky too. It's a collector's garden. That's a different story.
Well, because you get often asked about low maintenance, right? You want a garden, like, can you design me a garden, or what do I do to keep it low maintenance? And that's often one of my tips is just stick with 5 plants. Like, you can do multiple quantities of them, but then now you only have to learn how to take care of 5 plants.
That's it. That's great advice. That's exactly it. I get asked for no maintenance gardens.
Yes.
Wow. And I'm like, wait a minute.
I know.
So.
And that's when we start talking about plastic plants, right?
Yeah. There's no such thing as no.
Exactly. Exactly. So Matt, how many more do we have for Daryl?
Well, we're entering the last 10 minutes. We've got 3 more questions, so we'll see what we can do. But maybe we can forward them to Daryl, and he can let him answer them himself if we don't make it to the end. But Ralph,
they can come to Garden Chat.
That's right.
There we go. Exactly, and we'll plug that and tell everybody where to find your book. I think in just a minute.
Why don't
Ralph
we do
is,
that now, Matt? Why don't you plug the
okay,
book and
throw it. And
go
you'll
ahead.
talk about the garden chat and how we're going to get to it again.
Oh,
Yeah.
so what happened is when the pandemic kicked in and we started teaching a lot of the classes on Zoom, I realized Zoom is amazing and we can we can get together just on our own as much as we want. So I have a Zoom room and every Monday, 6:30 to 7:30 p.m. Eastern time, people just come into garden. It's called garden chat. So I'm there to answer
Excellent.
questions and things like that. But then
Okay.
what's happened is it's sort of become this group of people and we sort of just talk about all sorts of different things. So if you go to, the best way to find it is to go to my website, thenewgardenershandbook.com, and you'll find a link and you just click on it. It doesn't take a password or anything. You'll send you right into the waiting. You can come at 6:30 and stay all hour. You can show up at 7:15 and just
I don't know. It conflicts with our show, though, Daryl. We want people
no,
listening to the
no.
show.
I know. That's like they're in there right now, kind of doing it. Hopefully they came over this way, but
Yes.
yeah.
No. Thank you for joining us if you did come. So thank you.
Yeah, but that's the time that we're doing it. It's just sort of, I mean, you guys picked a good time. That's the right Monday evening is a great time to talk about gardening. So I think we're all thinking alike here. So
yeah.
But if anyone ever wants to stop in, you're certainly welcome to join us at Garden Chat.
Well, Joanne, we'll just have to be there at 6:30.
That's right.
To say hello and see what's going on.
Yeah, they can come in for a half an hour and then switch to the radio show.
Yeah, definitely. So we're definitely going to have to try that. So that's great. And that's wonderful that you've made yourself available to everybody. Because as you can see, there's lots of questions, and the new gardeners and experienced gardeners, always want to know take it to the next level.
Exactly.
That's right. Do we want to answer one more question before we?
Totally.
Well, why don't you talk about the book and where we could find?
Oh, we didn't do that. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Matt, why don't you talk about the book, or just tell us the title again and your usual? He does a great infomercial.
Oh, yes. Yeah. We're here talking with Daryl Beyers, author of The New Gardener's Handbook, Grow a Beautiful and Bountiful Garden, everything that you need to know. So we hope you've enjoyed the show tonight and our conversation with Daryl. And Daryl, why don't you take it away? How can our listeners purchase this amazing book and contact you and reach out to you?
Cool. The book is available really anywhere fine books are sold. So any big bookstores or big box stores and things like that. So Barnes and Noble and Walmart, or online through Amazon or Barnes and Noble or all these other places. You can also go to, I'll give a plug to the publisher, Timber Press. Excellent gardening publisher. So visit their site, go to timberpress.com, and you will find there'll be more books that you're going to want than you can imagine, because they publish a lot of really great gardening books. And so you can buy it through them. I do offer it on my website, thenewgardenershandbook.com. If you want an autographed copy, I will send you an autographed copy. That's one thing that I'm sort of doing, because I haven't been able to do a lot of public events because of the COVID.
Yeah.
I'm going to start doing that hopefully next year if things get better. Just going to farmers markets and book talks and stuff like that. But you can go to my site, or really kind of, if you just Google The New Gardener's Handbook, it'll pop up and you'll find it. It's pretty readily available. Yeah.
And that's why we chose November as the month to showcase garden authors, because I think they make great gardening books. Anybody who's a gardener, new gardener, experienced gardener, you've never have enough gardening books. No. So they are perfect. So, and finding out the latest and greatest, I think, is also great. So your holiday shopping, right? It's a great idea for the gardener in your life.
It comes as an ebook too. If people like ebooks, it comes as an ebook already. Yeah.
Excellent. Wow.
That's what's happening there.
Yeah, so. Definitely. Do you have one more? I don't know if we have time for one more question.
I can answer it quick. Let's do
a quick one.
Very quickly, and I just forwarded it to you. So if we don't, Ralph has written in, is it better to have a mulching pit or buy a commercial mulcher container or a barrel or some other receptacle? Which is the better way? Thanks.
Is he talking about composting?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, maybe just composting the mulching.
Or mulching leaves, maybe.
Right. So are we composting like in the ground, or we in like a barrel or other receptacle?
I'm a big fan of pit composting. I like to do pits,
Okay.
because they're adjustable. You can make a bigger pit or a smaller pit,
Mm.
and depending on what you need. And the trick to composting, this is the one trick if you're having trouble getting your composting to work, is you have the greens and the browns, nitrogen rich and carbon rich, and then add some soil in there. Even if you have a barrel or something else like that, the soil has the microbes that break it down. So don't just do the 2 ingredients, add a little bit of dirt in there, because that's going to have the stuff that's really going to start to break it down. So I pit compost because then it's right in the soil, it's buried basically. So that's the trick. And it's more flexible. I find it to be a little bit more flexible. But I do all the methods. I have a heap, I have a composter for the kitchen, I do all 3.
Do it all. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. Our listeners can always, like we say, if you're new to the show, please check out Down the Garden Path in your podcast app. We've got lots of content there for you. And you can always reach out to me at Joanne at down2earth with the number 2.ca. And Matt, they can find you.
Sure, you can find me, Matthew, at naturalAffinityDesigns.ca. And quickly, thank you, Katie, Patty, Petra, Liam, Ralph, Sam, and Shelley, for all your questions. Thank you again, everyone else who tuned in. Thank you, Daryl, for joining us here Down the Garden Path. And as always, thank you for tuning in here on Reality Radio 101.
Thank you for listening to Down the Garden Path with your host, Joanne Shaw and Matthew Dressing, right here on Reality Radio 101.